Welcome to another edition of Diplomatic Channel. I am Amarachi Ubani. Leaders in Paris, France eventually agreed on what has become to be known as a historic climate deal. COP21 has been one of the toughest conferences on climate change, but the new deal, fine as it is, will not be implemented until the year 2020. More of this later on the program. And from one summit to another, North and South Korea have not been able to complete the first high-level talks between the two. The discussions were focused on ending armed confrontation across their borders. Coming up also on the program, the comments by U.S. Republican presidential hopeful Donald Trump has drawn several reactions the past week, while some may dismiss Trump as cynic and his comments as unreasonable. It has struck the wrong chord among Muslim communities and highlights a growing sense of Islamophobia. Welcome back. COP21 has finally come to a close in the French capital, Paris. Leaders from nearly 200 countries participated in negotiations to strike the first climate deal to commit all countries to cut emissions. From the way the delegates applauded the deal, it must have been a fairer approach to dealing with the issue of climate change. It was historical indeed. For 2 weeks, delegates pored over a 48-page document that could hold the future deal. Saturday brought in the sunlight when the sound of the gavel meant a deal had finally been reached. The applause from the overwhelmingly positive audience meant the deal had been generally widely received.
When historians look back on this day, very historic day, they will say that global cooperation to secure a future safe from climate change took a dramatic U-turn here in Paris. Today, we can look into the eyes of our children, our grandchildren, and we can finally tell them that we have joined hands to bequeath a more habitable world to them and to future generations.
The deal comes 4 years after UN talks that pitted the interests of rich nations against poor, imperiled island states against rising economic powerhouses. French Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius declared the pact adopted to the standing applause and whistles of delegates from 195 nations.
It is an agreement of conviction. It is an agreement of solidarity with the most vulnerable. It is an agreement of long-term vision, because it is an agreement of commitment to turn this new legal framework into the engine of safe growth.
The deal also came as good news for Nigeria.
Temperature increases at least 1.5 degrees Celsius. The African Union Agenda 2063 shows how Africa is committed to contributing and delivering on this goal. The onus is now on us as political leaders to seize this historic opportunity.
Measures in the agreement include to peak greenhouse gas emissions as soon as possible and achieve a balance between sources and sinks of greenhouse gases in the second half of the century, to keep global temperature increase well below 2 degrees Celsius, and to pursue efforts to limit it to 1.5 degrees Celsius, to review progress every 5 years, and to dedicate $100 billion a year in climate finance for developing countries by 2020, with a commitment to further finance in the future. For the first time, the world has agreed on a longer-term aspiration for reaching a peak in greenhouse emissions as soon as possible and achieving a balance between output of man-made greenhouse gases and absorption by forests or oceans by the second half of this century. While scientists say pledges thus far could see global temperatures rise by as much as 3.7 degrees, the agreement also lays out a roadmap for checking up on progress. The first stocktake would occur in 2023, with further reviews every 5 years to steadily increase or ratchet up those measures. Unlike the Kyoto Protocol, the last major climate deal agreed in 1997, the Paris Pact will also not be a fully legally binding treaty, something that would almost certainly fail to pass the U.S. Congress. Leaders cheered in Paris when the sound of the gavel marked that after 2 weeks a new climate deal had been reached. But as with all summits, there are the activists outside who, rather than applaud the deal, have criticized it.
Activists outside the climate change conference were anything but pleased at the outcome of the meetings. Many denounced the draft, saying the accord favored richer nations.
A lot of talk, and it was great that the smaller countries were talking about 1.5 degrees, but there was no agreement reached, and the richer countries are doing nothing about it. They're too much in the pockets of the oil and gas corporations.
But the deal creates a system to encourage nations to make good on voluntary domestic efforts to curb emissions and provide billions more dollars to help poor nations cope with the transition to a greener economy. The demonstrators dismissed the ambitious language, saying that hot civic movements are better equipped than governments to deal with the impacts of climate change.
We are of course disappointed with the first version of the text, and I'm sure we'll be even more disappointed with the last version of the text. But civilians have shown that they're the ones who have had the solutions and not the governments.
Back inside the conference building, India's Environment Minister Prakash Javadekar criticized the deal for setting too low a bar for success.
While give and take is a normal in negotiations, we are of the opinion that the agreement could have been more ambitious. We share the concerns of several friends that agreement does not put us on the path to prevent temperature rise below 2 degrees, and that actions of developed countries are far below their historical responsibilities and fair share. We have, in the spirit of compromise, agreed on a number of phrases.
Meanwhile, the Nicaraguan delegate Paul Oist says the agreement was not enough, adding that many of the intended nationally determined contributions are sufficient. However, shortly after the deal was announced, world leaders began to react. U.S. President Barack Obama hailed the agreement as ambitious and historic, but also warned against complacency.
In my first inaugural address, I committed this country to the tireless task of combating climate change and protecting this planet for future generations. 2 weeks ago in Paris, I said before the world that we needed a strong global agreement to accomplish this goal. An enduring agreement that reduces global carbon pollution and sets the world on a course to a low-carbon future. A few hours ago, we succeeded. We came together around the strong agreement the world needed. We met the moment.
The German Chancellor Angela Merkel hailed the talks as a real success, saying it sets the course for the world towards an energy transition and towards reason regarding climate change. She also says it gives a chance for billions of people not to be scared for their future. Pope Francis urged countries that signed the agreement to join in a concerted commitment to put it in practice and to remember the poor as they do so.